We're in Masechet Megilah on Daf Yud Beis and Aleph, and we're going to start about 5 lines into the wide lines. And the Gemara here is bringing drashot on the psukim in Megillat Esther, and it begins with the following: Beharo so as Osher Kavod Malchuso. So in the Megillah, and in the very beginning, it describes the Seuda of Achashverosh, the party of Achashverosh, and in the 4th pasuk, it says Beharo so as Osher Kavod Malchuso Betzakar Teverosh Gedulaso Yamim Rabim Shmonim Umaas Yom. So Achashverosh in this big party displayed his wealth and his riches, and the Gemara wants to understand this a little bit more deeply, and it's a sort of a midrashic interpretation. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Bechinina, Melamed Shalavash Bigdei Kahuna. So what this alludes to is the fact that Achashverosh wore the Bigdei Kahuna, the garments of the Kohen Gadol, which he had inherited from his predecessors who destroyed the Beis HaMikdash and exiled the Jewish people. How do we know this? Ksiv hacha yikar tiferes gedula so. It says in the Megillah that they were Tiferes Gedula So, Ksiv Hasam, and it says over there, L'chavod U'Letaf Ares, this is V'yasisa Bigdei Kodesh L'Aron Achicha L'chavod U'Letaf Ares in Sefer Shemos, describing the Bigdei Kahuna for the Mishkan. So, since the language is very similar, this could teach us that the clothing that Achashverosh wore at the Seuda were the Bigdei Kahuna. So the Megillah goes on to describe the in Pasuk Hey, so first it seems like in Pasuk Gimel, he started with the Mishteh. First, in Pasuk Gimel, he made a party for all of his officers and servants of Persia and Madai, and the officers of the provinces before him. And then it says, when these days were complete, then he made a feast for all those people who were from Shushan. So the Gemara understands that there was first a party for the outlying areas of the kingdom, and then for the people within Shushan. Rav Shmuel debated this. Chad Amar Melech Bikeach Haya, v'Chad Amar Melech Tipesh Haya. So Rav and Shmuel had a debate. We're not really sure which one of them said which opinion, but we do know that each opinion was presented by one of them. One says that he was a very wise and shrewd king, and one says he was very not smart. Tipesh. Man da'amar melech pikeach haya shapir avad dekara v'rachika bereisha debnei masya kol emas debai mefayis lehu. The wise strategy he had is that first he was makarev rechokim. First he engaged in the people who were further from his palace, further from the base of his political base. To Bnei Masya, because the people of his own city, you don't really need to work very hard to strengthen your base, because they're your base. The people that live close to him were going to certainly be supportive of him. But the people who were distant were the challenge, so he wanted to give them priority and focus his attention on them, and then after that, he'll focus on the people of Shushan. Rav and Shmuel assumed that there was a sort of they assumed that there was a sort of a rebellion earlier, and Achashverosh was trying to solidify his rulership at this time through this party. Uman da'amar tipesh haya. So the one who thinks that he was not wise, because it's really smart to first focus on strengthening your base. Because you really want to make sure that your base is very strong. This is like a constant debate whether politicians should focus on strengthening their base or sort of take it for granted and then try to really reach out to those who are not their natural supporters. So that's a debate between Rav and Shmuel about the wisdom of Achashverosh's strategy in first celebrating and engaging those who are further, and then the people of Shushan. This is a euphemism. What was the reason why the Soneim Shal Yisrael, the enemies of Israel, which really means Israel, were guilty or chayav kliya? That what do they do to deserve the decree that almost meant that they would be destroyed? Amar lehem, imru atem. You tell us. Rabbi Shimon Yochai said to the Talmidim, you tell me. Amru lo mipnei shenenu misudash also Russia. So the Talmidim said to Rabbi Shimon Yochai, the reason why the failure of the Jewish community at this time was the fact that they partook of this Seuda of Achashverosh. So, there must have been something that the Jews did wrong at this time that meant that they were going to have to deal with this crisis. So the sin must have been that that they were nana from the Seuda. That's why the people of Shushan, in the time of Shushan, this kingdom was subjected to this decree. Imkain, so Rabbi Shimon Yochai asks, if this is the case, Shebeshushan Yihargu, Shebechola Olam Kulo Al Yihargu. So it should have been only the people of Shushan who were going to be destroyed. Why was it that all the Jews of the whole world? Amrulo Amoratem. So they so the students of Rabbi Shimon Yochai said, okay, so you challenge our opinion. So what's your opinion? The reason was because they bowed down to an idol. Rashi says, "Bimei Nebuchadnezzar." That Nebuchadnezzar told all the Jews that they had to bow down to the idols, and everyone did it because they were scared. So this is a big sin. It's one of the mitzvahs that a person has to give his life for, not to bow down to an idol. So, this is the sin. Amrulo v'chimaso panim yesh b'davar. So the Talmidim asked Rav Shimon Yochai, if that was the case, so why were they saved? Rashi says, Eich zachu l'nes. That was a good reason to be guilty. Why were they saved miraculously? Amr lahem, heim lo asu elo lifnim. They only did it externally. Rashi says, meira. They only did it out of fear. They only bowed out of fear. They didn't really believe in the idol or in Nebuchadnezzar. Hashem also only made it like an external appearance of destruction, but not actually. The pasuk says in Eicha, which alludes to the fact that it's only if it's really in your heart that you're destroyed, even though there's a mitzvah to give one's life before doing idolatry, but if one does do it out of the threat of one's life, then we're not as responsible because we still recognize that it was coerced. There's also a debate whether the idol of Nebuchadnezzar was actually a form of avodah zarah, that they were worshiping the idol, or if Nebuchadnezzar was just asking everyone to bow down to him to show that they respect him as the leader, but not necessarily idolatry, which obviously is a much different level of magnitude. The Gemara continues to interpret the Megillah. B'chatzar ginas b'tan hamelech. So the Megillah says something interesting, that at this party, they were like in 3 locations. Chatzar ginat bitan hamelech. So what was this? So, or which location was it that they were all in? So, the Gemara offers a couple of interpretations. Rav Shmuel, Chad Amar, Haroy lechatzer lechatzer, Haroy legina legina, Haroy lebitan lebitan. There were 3 locations. There was the chatzar, the courtyard, the gina was the garden, and the bitan is the palace. So whoever was worthy of being in the Gina would go to the Gina. Who was fitting to be in the Chatzer would be in the Chatzer, and whoever was most prominent would be invited into the palace itself. So these three areas, there was a VIP section, and there was the regular section, and there was the economy plus, etc. That's one interpretation. V'chad amar hoshivan b'chatzar v'lo hichzikasan. No, it was chronologically. First, everyone went to the chatzar, but it got too crowded, so they didn't fit. So begina v'lo hichzikasan. Then they went to the gina, but they also overflowed from the gina. Achech nisan the bitan, until they had to go into the bitan because there was no room anywhere else. Ve'chzikasan, and that's where they fit. That's why it says b'chatzar ginas bitan hamelech. B'masnisan tana. Another interpretation was learned in the Mishnah or Brisa. Hoshivan b'chatzar. No, they were in the chatzar. Upatach lehem shnei psachim echad legina ve'echad lebitan. They were all in the chatzar, and there were two entranceways where they could sort of like overflow into the gina and the bitan. According to this interpretation, we understand why it says b'chatzar ginas bitan hamelech. It doesn't say b'chatzar uba gina uba bitan, or b'chatzer b'gina to bitan, but it's b'chatzer and then also the gina bitan on the side. Chur karparsu techeles. So they were wearing chur karparsu techeles, white fine cotton, and blue were the garments. So what was this? My chur. Rav Amar Chari Chari. Rav says that the chor means that there were holes, like woven. Shmuel Amar Milas Levana, white wool. Hitzilem. That's what was spread out. Karpas Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Karim Shel Pasim. There were pillows. Al Galilei Kesef Amudei Sheish Mitos Zahav V'Kesef. This is the continuation of the pasuk. Chur karpasu techeles achuz b'chavlei putz v'argaman al galilei kesef v'amudei sheish, on marble, silver rods and marble pillars, mitos zahav, couches of gold, v'kesef, and silver, al ritzpas bat v'sheish v'darbas ucheres, on the floor, etc. So the Gemara says, Mitos zahav v'chesef, Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, haroy l'kesef kesef, haroy l'zahav l'zahav. So why does it say there were couches of gold and silver? So some people got the gold ones, and some people got the silver. Amar lo Rabbi Nechemia, imkein atamatil kina besuda. How could you imagine that Achashverosh would make gold couches and silver couches and have different classes? This only causes jealousy at the meal. Ella. Haim shel kesef v'ragleim shel zahav. No, they were made out of silver and the legs were gold, but everyone had the same ones. Tosos here asked the question that everyone's thinking about. Imkain, if we're so concerned about making jealousy, Leman da'amar le'el haroy legina legina haroy lechatzer lechatzer imkain atamatel kina besuda. So, if we're so worried about making people's sensitivity and not making anyone jealous, so why is it that earlier we suggested that there were different people who were roi for the chatzer and the gina? Why wasn't this question raised earlier? The shlomar the sfirule the kavan de lo hayu roim zet zeh leika kina. I like how he says that. The sfirule, he thought that if you separate the classes into different spaces, they won't know each other. No one will realize, and they won't be as jealous. But if it's really like out in the open, the gold and the silver, and everyone sees the people who have different accommodations, then that will cause jealousy. That's always the thing that makes people think that they won't be jealous, because no one's going to know. Of course, people do know, but maybe it is mitigated by the fact that it's not as much in their face. Okay, the Gemara continues. Bahar Vashesh. Amar Rabbi Asi explains, Avanim shemechotetos el ba'aleim. What this means was that the floor was paved with stones that the owners really sought them out and really liked them. Similarly, in this pasuk, this language also means that the stones of the crown were mitnosus al admaso, that people tried very hard to get them throughout the land. V'dar v'socheres, Rav Amar dare dare. What does it mean, dar v'socheres? So Rav says it means there were stones lined up in a row. Ushmuel Amar even tova yesh b'krachi ayam. Shmuel says it was just a very special stone, which is found somewhere in the ocean. V'dara shma, and its name was Dara. Hoshivam be'emsa suda. It was put in the middle of the Su'uda, umeira lehem kitzarayim, and it was illuminated like it was day. Tvei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, shekara duror l'chol balei Su'uda schora. Another interpretation of dar v'socheres is that Achashverosh declared freedom, l'chol balei schora, that no one would have to pay taxes. There's no way to get the people into a better mood. There's no way to get some political support amongst your people than to lower taxes. Vashkos b'chlei zahav v'chelim mikelim shonim. And the Megillah continues, which is in pasuk Zayin, Parak Aleph, Vashkos b'chlei zahav v'chelim mikelim shonim. So the Gemara interprets, Mishunim mibayale. If it was like different kalim, it should have said mishuneh. What is shonim? Amarava yotza baskol v'amar v'amar lahem rishonim kalu b'mnei kalim v'atem shonim b'hem. So the baskol proclaimed that their kalim shonim from the word like repeat to shoneh. So Achashverosh's predecessors had thought that they were confident in the fact that the redemption didn't come. They had this idea that it would take 70 years for the exile to be ended, and they calculated and thought that it didn't come, so now they were safe, and the Jewish kingdom wouldn't revolt against them and wouldn't knock them down, but they miscalculated. And they celebrated with the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash to say that this is done. V'atem shonim, and Achashverosh is making the same mistake by miscalculating, being overconfident, and therefore using the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash, which is why many have the minhag to lay in these words in the tune of Eicha, because it alludes to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. V'yein malchus. So the end of that pasuk says, "Yein malchus Rav ki ala melech." The wine of the royal wine was in abundance. What's the royal wine? Rav Amar Melamed shekol echad ve'echad eshkeu yayin shegadol himenu b'shanim. Rav says that royal wine is wine that every person got wine that was older than each person. So I guess the older the person was, the better the wine. Vashetiyah kidas ein ones. My kidas. What's the word kidas? Like which alludes to dati, being observance. Amar Bichanan mishum Rabbi Meir kidas ma kidash al Torah. It's in accordance with like dati, like it's an allusion. Of course, it's a midrash. Kidas literally means, well, here of the translation, they don't really translate it according to the law, like whatever maybe the normal way of drinking was. But the Gemara interprets it midrashically to refer to the halacha, ma dashal Torah achila meruba mishtia, just like according to the Torah's rules. There should always be more food than wine, which Rashi explains it comes from the korbanos. If you look at the way the Torah describes the korbanos, achilas mizbeach meruba mishtia, par v'shlosha esronim solas la'achila v'nesach chatzi ahin. So the Torah presents the korbanos, which often had meat and wine for the libations. So there's always a larger amount of meat relative to the wine. So there's like cows and then some wine. So that's a dash shel Torah, which presumably is also a lesson that's how we should also partake of a seuda, that the food should be the more dominant or the more abundant, and the wine should be less. Av seudaso shel oso rasha achila meruba mishtia. So he also followed the das Torah and had more food than wine. The Gemara doesn't continue to elaborate, but I wonder if the point of this is that drinking shouldn't be our main form of celebration. The wine should be like on the side. But, basically you have a meal, you have a glass of wine. You don't have 2 bites of food and then 2 bottles of wine. So the moral of the story is really to make the drinking not so abundant. Possibly Achashverosh just had a lot of wine, as we see, and even more food, so he sort of missed the point of making it in moderation. But kept the proportion, but maybe in a larger amount. No one was forced. What does it mean that no one was forced? Everyone was offered wine from where they came from. People came from all over the empire to celebrate. So each person got the wine that he was accustomed to from their country. So that made it that you weren't forced because you were able to drink comfortably. To do according to the will of every individual person. So Rava says this is an illusion that the people in charge were Mordechai and Haman. Rashi says, they were the ones who were in charge, and they decided who got how much wine. So this is like a foreshadowing to the leadership of Mordechai and Haman that will unfold through the Megillah. Ish Yudi, Haman, Ish Tsar Ve'oyev. So each person, Mordechai and Haman, were both called Ish in the Megillah later on. So when it says Ish Ve'ish, it's the Ish that's referred to later, Mordechai and Haman. The Megillah continues to say that in Pasuk Ches, also Vashti made a party for the women, Beis HaMalchus, in the royal house, Asher L'Melech Achashverosh. So Beis HaNashim Ibayle, it seems like she was making a party for the women. So why does it say Beis HaMalchus Asher L'Melech Achashverosh? So the Gemara interprets, Amar Rava, Shneim L'Dvar Aveira Niskavnu. They both had the same intention. Both Achashverosh and Vashti both were intending for sin, meaning she made her party close to where the men were because she wanted to promote inappropriate relationships between the men and the women, just like Achashverosh was doing on the other side. Hainu Da'amri Inshe, and this is an allusion to the common saying of people of Bavel, Ihu be kare v'itse bebotzina, that he with a large pumpkin and she with a small pumpkin. So in other words, this is a saying, an Aramaic saying, which means that men and women, they do things slightly differently, but they're both basically doing the same idea. Rashi says they're both diluim ketanos kilomar sheba also min atzmo zen noef zen noefes hu omer laharos es yofia v'hila kachnas kavna she is takla b'yofia. He's trying to gaze at her and she's trying to be gazed at, and they're both trying to achieve the same thing. Okay, then we continue in the Megillah. So here you have Perak Aleph Pasuk Yud. B'yom Hashvi Ketov Lev HaMelech B'yoyin Amar L'Mon B'Sachar V'Rab B'Gasa Avgasa, etc. So on the 7th day, Ketov Lev HaMelech B'Yayin Atu Ad Hashta Lo Tov Libe B'Chamra. Is it only now that his heart is enjoying the wine? Amarava Yom Hashvi Shabbos Hoya. It was a day of Shabbos. Yisrael Ochlim V'Shosin It's an allusion to the fact that it was Shabbos to contrast the style of the Jews. The Jews, they start, first thing you do on Shabbos is you go to shul and you daven, you make kiddush, and then you eat. So that makes the primary focus on the spiritual, and then the physical sort of comes along. So Ovdei Chachavim were more accustomed to just start straight up with the tiflus. Halalu omrim midayos naos, halalu omrim parsios naos. This is what happened at the Suda. First thing, didn't start with kiddush, didn't start with a tefillah, started with a debate about which women were more attractive. Some people say the people from Madai were more beautiful. Some people say the people from the Persians are more beautiful. Amal Machashverosh, Kli Shani Mishtamish Bo Eino Lo Midai Velo Parsi Elakasti. So Achashverosh says, no, my vessel that I use, meaning his queen, is not Madai, not Parsi. She's Kasti. She's more beautiful than all of yours. Ritzonchem Laharoso. You want to see? So here's what they were discussing: the objectification of the women. Amrulo in. They said yes. Ubevaj teheruma. So here, the people who Achashverosh was speaking to are the ones who suggested, okay, we want to see how beautiful is. We want to see her naked. Shebimida she'adam moded ba modedin lo. That it's mida connected mida. The mida that a person measures others, he himself is measured. Melamed shahisa Vashti arasha mevia benos Yisrael mafshiton arumos va'osabim melacha b'Shabbos. So the Gemara says that what Vashti used to do is she would make the Jewish girls undress and violate Shabbos at her commands. So she sins. She sinned in this way of making the Jewish women undress. So she had to be punished by being called upon to be undressed in front of Achashverosh. So the Gemara, the Megilah never says anything that Vashti did wrong. She made a party. We interpret it as a negative kind of a party, and she was removed from the entire story. The Gemara, I think, portrays her as a bad person, as a villain, because ultimately she was a loser in the story. So I think the Megilah, the Gemara, wants to say it must be that the reason why she was unsuccessful was that she must have had a prior sin that caused that to be deserving. That aside, you would think that her refusal was actually quite heroic, that she refused to submit to his will and to act immorally in public. That was decreed upon her, meaning that what she did is exactly the thing that was decreed upon her. This pasuk also alludes to this mida connected mida, that she was punished as a result of what she did. Vatimain hamalka, and she Vatimain hamalka Vashti refused to go. Mechti pritzasa havai. If we just said that she was a prutza, she was intending to sin herself. So the Amar Mar Shneim L'Dvar Aveira Nitzkavnu. We said earlier that both Achashverosh and Vashti were both intending to act immorally and to sin. My tone lo asoi. So why did she refuse to come? Was all of a sudden she was a tznuah? So the Gemara said no. There must be an answer for that. Amar B'Yosi B'Chanina Malamed Sheparcha B'Tzaras. So what happened was, it must be that suddenly she got tzaras. She got a skin disease that made like a leprosy that made her skin look terrible, and she didn't want to do it. But Asnita Tana Ba Gavriel Vasal Zanav. The Brisa says that Gavriel Hamalach came and made her a zanav, which means a tail. Others, Mother Mefarshim say it just means any sort of growth or appendage, not necessarily a tail, but something miraculous happened to make her not want to do this and to presumably to cause the story to unfold to make way for Esther. We'll stop here.